The sound of metal cuffs clicking shut can silence an entire world. In that school parking lot, the Florida sun burned hot, but not half as hot as the shame that filled the air. A 10-year-old boy screamed, "That's my mom!" while his mother, calm, poised, and heartbreakingly composed, whispered only 6 words, "You're making a big mistake." The officers didn't listen. One of them smirked, muttering, "Another trespasser causing trouble." But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman they were dragging toward the patrol car was the very person who'd sworn them into office. The woman they were handcuffing was their presiding judge. Before we go further, take a breath with me. Because this story, this one will make you feel something. Welcome. Wherever you're watching from, drop your city or country in the comments right now. Tell me the time where you are. I love seeing how far this community reaches, and make sure you subscribe, because the next story I'll share will leave you questioning not just what's fair, but what's human. Would you have stayed calm like she did? Or would you have snapped? I want to hear your answer below. Her name was Judge Alana Pierce, 35 years old, mother, mentor, and one of the youngest federal judges in the state of Florida. She grew up in Jacksonville, in a small blue-painted house where the nights were filled with the hum of streetlights and the quiet hope of a better tomorrow. Her father had been a history teacher until the night police mistook him for someone else and dragged him away in front of their home. She was 9. She never forgot his words that night. "Don't hate them, baby girl. Change them." From that moment, Alana made herself a promise to rise so high in the system that no one could ever silence her again. Law school, clerkships, endless nights reading case files, under dim lamps every moment sharpened her resolve. But success came with a cost. Each day she wore that black robe, she carried the weight of 2 worlds, one that respected her title and one that doubted her skin. On the morning of her arrest, the world seemed normal. She brewed her coffee just the way she liked, black, no sugar. She helped her son, a B, memorize the names of planets for his school science fair. She smiled as he said, "You'll come watch, right, Mom?" And she promised she would. When evening came, the sky was gold and quiet. She drove him to the school lot, parking in the staff-only space, a place she'd parked many times before with permission. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her badge, tucked discreetly in her purse, and kissed Abby on the forehead. He ran off, excited. She watched him disappear into the school's glass doors, unaware that, within the hour, those same doors would reflect flashing red and blue lights. Meanwhile, just across the lot, 2 officers sat in their cruiser Trent Mason, a young rookie desperate to prove himself, and Sergeant Doyle, a man who'd seen too much and learned too little. Doyle's gaze caught her car first. "Staff only," he muttered. "Doesn't look like staff to me." Mason hesitated. "Maybe she's a parent, sir." Doyle scoffed. "Maybe you'll learn to stop assuming the best." And with that, the wheels of injustice began to turn. Inside the school, Principal Rivera was helping set up the science fair displays, nervous, distracted, glancing often out the window. Something about the flashing lights unsettled her. But she told herself, "Don't get involved. Not again." Outside, Alana returned to her car just as the officers approached. "Ma'am, this vehicle's parked in a restricted area." Doyle barked. She smiled politely. "It's all right, officer. I'm here for the school event. I'll be leaving soon." Her voice was calm, too calm. It irritated him. "License and registration." "Of course." She handed over her ID. He glanced at it for less than a second, tossed it back. Cute fake. Something inside her shifted, but she didn't show it. Years of courtroom discipline hardened her tone. "That's a real federal identification card, Sergeant." He stepped closer. "You raising your voice to me, ma'am?" At that moment, Officer Mason looked down at the badge she'd handed over. The name seemed familiar, Pierce. He thought he'd seen it on a court document before. But Doyle's glare froze him. "Possible trespassing," Doyle muttered into his radio. "Requesting backup." Across the glass doors, A.B. pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging the pain. He saw his mother standing beside the car, her hands raised slightly, not in fear, but in restraint. She tried again, softly this time. "Sergeant, if you just—" He cut her off. "Save it. You people always have an excuse." The words landed like stones. And in that moment, something inside Alana broke not in anger, but in heartbreak. Still, she refused to fight. She knew every camera, every bystander, every whisper would twist the narrative if she did. And when the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she didn't scream. She simply looked him in the eyes and said, "Maybe one day, you'll understand who you just arrested." As the cruiser door slammed, phones began to record. A mother crying, a son screaming, a community watching. The video would spread across the internet within hours, tagged simply, "Florida cops arrest black woman for trespassing at her son's school." But the truth behind that headline was far greater than anyone imagined. So let me ask you again, if this were you, standing there in front of your child, accused of something you didn't do, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have fought back? Tell me in the comments. Because as this story unfolds, you'll see sometimes silence is the loudest form of power. The room smelled of metal, paper, and something else, pride. Thick, stale pride that had been sitting there for years, disguised as authority. It was quiet now, too quiet for a police station that had been loud just minutes earlier. The sound of Alana's cuffs being unlocked echoed like a memory someone was trying to forget. She sat there, calm and still, her hands resting on the table in front of her. She could have spoken, she could have shouted, but she didn't. She simply said, "You'll find out soon enough." Those words were not a threat, they were a promise. Sergeant Doyle leaned back in his chair, pretending to be unfazed. His voice, once so full of command, carried a new tremor. "Lady, if you think some attitude's gonna get you out of this, you're mistaken." Alana looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of calm that made everyone else in the room restless. There's a certain strength in stillness, a certain power that comes when a person refuses to dance to the rhythm of chaos. She had that power. It frightened him. The rookie officer at the desk, Officer Price, barely 23, had been quietly entering information into the system. He typed her name once, then again, then slower. His eyes widened. He stared at the screen like he was reading something impossible. The cursor blinked beside the words, "Federal Judge Alana Pierce, District Court, Northern Florida." He swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Sir, you need to see this." Doyle rolled his eyes. "What is it now?" Price turned the monitor toward him. Doyle leaned forward, squinting at the name, reading it twice before leaning back with a nervous laugh. "No way. No, that's a coincidence. That woman drives a Honda Civic with a cracked bumper. Judges don't drive Civics." But the rookie's voice grew firmer. "Sir, it's her. Look, badge number, ID, photo. It's her." Silence. The kind of silence that wraps around a room and squeezes the air out of it. Every officer in the vicinity stopped pretending to work. Even the hum of the vending machine seemed louder. Doyle's smirk faltered, replaced by something raw, not guilt yet, but disbelief, fighting for survival. Alana sat there watching him, her hands folded neatly, the picture of composure. Her eyes held no malice, no vengeance, only a deep, aching sadness. The kind you feel when people confirm your worst suspicions about the world. "You had every chance to listen," she said quietly. "Every chance." Doyle's voice broke. You could have told us who you were." "I did," she replied softly. "You didn't hear me." And that was the truth, not just about the moment, but about everything. People like her had been saying the same thing for generations. "You didn't hear me." The rookie stepped back, his heart pounding. He whispered to another officer, "She's the one who swore Doyle in last year." And that, somehow, made it worse. Within minutes, phones started ringing, one call after another. The dispatcher's face turned pale. The whispers grew louder. "Chief wants a report. Governor's office on line 2. Media's picking up the story." Doyle's authority crumbled like wet paper. He barked at Price, "Don't say a word to anyone." But it was too late. Word had already spread. A civilian had recorded part of the intake, Alana walking in cuffs, her head held high, the officers smirking. That clip had already hit social media. In less than an hour, her name, Judge Alana Pierce, was trending across Florida. The irony burned through the precinct like fire. Officer Mason arrived late to the chaos, breathless, confused. He looked around reporters outside, flashing cameras, tense faces. "What's happening?" he asked another cop. "She's a judge," someone whispered. "Their judge." Mason froze. His stomach dropped. The memory hit him hard, her calm eyes, her voice saying, "Check my ID." And his silence. He had seen the badge, the name. He had felt something was wrong, but he let fear of his superior outweigh the truth in front of him. He took a deep breath, stepped toward Doyle's office, and saw her sitting there still handcuffed to the bench, though it was clear now that the handcuffs no longer symbolized her restraint, but theirs. Her silence had become her weapon. Reporters outside shouted questions, flashes of light through the window. "Is it true officers arrested a federal judge? Do you plan to press charges? What was the reason for the arrest?" Doyle's voice trembled as he spoke to his superior over the phone. "Chief, it was a misunderstanding, I swear. We were following protocol. We didn't know." The chief's reply was cold and precise. "You didn't know because you didn't look. The governor's office is calling in 10 minutes. Fix this now." Doyle turned toward Alana, his eyes full of panic now. "Judge Pierce, ma'am, this is a mistake," she said gently. "Yes, but not the first one, and not the last." Mason couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice breaking. "She told us to check her ID. She told us, sir. We didn't listen." The room went still again. Doyle's face turned red, veins rising at his temples. But the damage was done. Mason's confession wasn't rebellion, it was conscience finding its voice. For the first time since her arrest, Alana turned to look at him. Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finally hearing me." The words hit him like forgiveness, heavy, undeserved, but real. Outside, the press had gathered in full force. Helicopters circled overhead. Inside, phones rang without pause. Lawyers called. Judges called. Even the governor's secretary demanded answers. The story was too big to bury now. Within hours, images of Alana sitting calmly in that holding room flooded every news feed in Florida. The headline read, "Florida police arrest federal judge at her son's school department in crisis." Some called it racism. Others called it incompetence. But everyone called it wrong. And through it all, Alana said nothing. Not a statement. Not a single public word. Her silence drove the media wild. Speculation filled the airwaves. Was she planning to sue? Would she resign? Would she press charges? But Alana knew the truth. Sometimes, the loudest message comes from saying nothing at all. Her stillness became a mirror that forced everyone else to see themselves clearly. Inside the precinct, Officer Mason couldn't stop pacing. "We should have seen it. I should have said something." Doyle slammed his fist on the desk. "You think this is just about you? You think this doesn't ruin all of us?" "It's already ruined," Mason whispered. "Because we made it that way." Alana's phone buzzed from where it sat on the desk, confiscated hours earlier. The chief entered the room himself, sweating under the weight of the cameras outside. "Judge Pierce," he said stiffly. "On behalf of the department, She raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Chief, I don't need apologies. I need accountability." The chief nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "You'll have it." Reporters pressed against the glass doors. Lights flashed through every window. The chief turned to Doyle. "You're suspended pending investigation. Effective immediately." Doyle opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Pride had built him a tower, and in a single afternoon, that tower collapsed. Officer Mason, tears burning behind his eyes, finally spoke. "Judge Pierce, I'm so sorry." She stood, free now, her wrists red from the cuffs. "I know," she said quietly. "Just make sure you remember this feeling the next time you see someone who looks like me without the title." Her words weren't sharp. They were sorrowful, heavy with truth. And in that moment, Mason realized the depth of what they had done. As she walked out, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Judge Pierce, how do you feel about your arrest? Do you plan to sue the department? Will you step down from your position?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The world already knew. Every major network replayed her arrest footage side by side with her official portrait, the robe, the gavel, the same calm eyes. The contrast was unbearable. Commentators debated. Activists protested. The governor made a statement. And through it all, she stayed silent. That silence became a storm. It made people ask hard questions about prejudice, about power, about how easily respect can vanish when skin color replaces title in someone's eyes. Officer Mason couldn't sleep that night. He replayed her words again and again. "You didn't hear me." He wanted to forget her calmness, but he couldn't. It haunted him because it wasn't anger that broke him, it was grace. By morning, national news had taken over the story. The department's phone lines crashed from public outrage. The governor himself called Alana personally to apologize. She accepted, but only after making one quiet request: that the officers involved be enrolled in community sensitivity training led by citizens, not superiors. The chief hesitated. "You want them to teach us?" "Yes," she replied, "because sometimes justice doesn't come from punishment, it comes from understanding." Her words went viral. Clips of her calm demeanor in that holding room spread across TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. Millions watched in disbelief. Some wept, some raged, but everyone felt. In every corner of the country, people began saying the same thing: if a judge can be treated like that, what hope do the rest of us have? And that's when her silence turned into something bigger, a mirror for an entire nation. By the time the evening news aired, she was trending worldwide. Hashtags filled the screen. Number Justice for Judge Pierce. Number Silence is Power. Number Hear Her Now. Even Doyle couldn't escape it. His face, once stern and untouchable, now replayed endlessly online beside clips of him ignoring her ID. He sat at home, staring at the screen, drowning in the echo of his own arrogance. His wife tried to speak, but he only whispered one sentence: "I thought she was lying." Meanwhile, Mason visited his mother, a retired nurse who had fought her own quiet battles with discrimination. He told her everything. She listened, sighed, and said, "You can't change what you did, son, but you can decide who you'll be tomorrow." Those words would stay with him forever. And Alana? She returned home that night, exhausted but not defeated. She tucked her son into bed, brushed his hair from his forehead, and kissed him goodnight. He looked up at her and asked, "Mom, did they say sorry?" She smiled faintly. "Not yet. But they will, in time." Because she knew this wasn't just her fight. It was every quiet battle fought in parking lots, offices, classrooms, and courtrooms across America where dignity is mistaken for defiance and calmness for guilt. By the next morning, every major newspaper had one headline: "Judge teaches Florida police the meaning of justice without saying a word." And that became the truth. Her silence was not weakness. It was a declaration of strength. It was the sound of centuries of patience finally echoing back. So I'll ask you this: do you think silence is the most powerful form of justice? Or should she have shouted her truth sooner? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe right now, because the next story I'll share will remind you that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that refuse to scream. The world has a strange way of turning its back on quiet truths until they're too loud to ignore. When the video of Judge Alana Pierce's arrest hit the internet, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the deep inhale before a storm. By the next morning, that storm had a name: Number Justice for Judge Pierce. It started small, a few tweets, a handful of posts on local forums. But by the time the sun rose over Florida's East Coast, her face was everywhere. News anchors replayed the clip on loop: a dignified woman in handcuffs, calm eyes that told a story far bigger than the moment they captured. Some called her fearless, others called her dangerous, but everyone agreed on one thing: she had forced the nation to look at itself. The police department's press office flooded with calls. Their inbox overflowed with outrage. Within 24 hours, what began as a minor misunderstanding had become an international scandal. And in the center of it all stood Alana, silent, still, deliberate. For days she refused interviews, ignored requests for exclusive statements, and avoided television cameras. But when she finally spoke, she chose to do it her way, in a small courthouse room filled with reporters, community leaders, and victims of similar injustices. The press conference wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. When she stepped up to the podium, every flashbulb went off at once, painting her face in harsh white light. Yet her voice, when it came, was soft, almost too soft for the room. "I wasn't just arrested," she said slowly, each word deliberate. "I was reminded of what it feels like to be seen as less than who you are. I was reminded that education, success, and status mean nothing when bias walks through the door before truth." The room fell silent. Her eyes scanned the crowd faces from every network, microphones lined like soldiers, waiting for her next word. "I wasn't arrested for being on school property," she continued, her voice steady now, gaining weight. "I was arrested for being who I am." And in that moment, I remembered something my father once told me, that no title, no robe, no badge will ever protect a person from prejudice. Only character can do that. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. The pause that followed was heavy and yet peaceful, the kind of silence that makes people realize they're witnessing history, not just hearing a statement. "I do not hate the officers who arrested me," she said at last. "Hate is easy. Accountability is harder. I believe we change this nation not by screaming, but by standing." A reporter raised his hand. "Judge Pierce, do you plan to press charges?" She smiled faintly. "I plan to press forward." That line alone became the headline across every outlet within minutes. Press forward. Two words that turned outrage into movement. From Washington to Los Angeles, from classrooms to courtrooms, her story sparked conversations that had long been buried under comfort and denial. School teachers showed her speech to students. Judges quoted her words in chambers. Even police departments across the country started reviewing their own procedures. But back in Florida, within the walls of her own courthouse, something even more profound was happening. The same department that had once escorted her in cuffs now sat trembling before her bench. Weeks later, the inquiry began. The day of the hearing felt surreal, not because she was in power, but because she was finally free to speak truth in a room that could no longer silence her. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the back wall. Outside, protesters held signs: "Respect, reform, remember." Inside, the air felt like glass, fragile, transparent, ready to break at any second. When she entered, everyone stood. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper: respect born from realization. Sergeant Doyle sat stiffly at the defense table, his jaw set, his eyes hollow. Next to him sat Officer Mason, visibly shaken, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Principal Rivera, dressed in gray, sat in the audience behind them, her face pale with regret. The hearing began not with accusations, but with truth. One by one, statements were read, evidence presented, video replayed, each moment of that fateful day dissected in front of the world. But when it came time for Judge Pierce to speak, she didn't read from notes. She looked directly at the men before her. "Sergeant Doyle," she began softly, "you once believed authority was measured by control. You mistook arrogance for strength. You thought the uniform gave you power over people, not responsibility for them. Today, I want you to understand something: justice isn't revenge. Justice is balance. And balance begins when we stop protecting our pride and start protecting our humanity." Doyle's lip quivered. He tried to meet her gaze but couldn't. Years of habit of dominance and denial melted under the weight of her words. "Ma'am," he started, his voice rough. But she raised her hand gently. "You don't owe me an apology, Sergeant. You owe one to every person who never had the chance to prove who they were before you decided for them." There was no anger in her tone, only sorrow, the kind that seeps into the cracks of even the hardest hearts. Then she turned to Officer Mason. His eyes were red. "You had doubt," she said softly. "You saw the truth and stayed silent because you feared disobedience. Fear is human, but silence in the face of wrong is not neutrality, it's consent. You learned that the hard way." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I wanted to speak up," he whispered, "but he was my superior. I was afraid I'd lose everything." Alana's gaze softened. "Then you've learned the most important lesson of all: integrity will always cost you something. But silence will cost you your soul." The room was still. Every word she spoke felt less like judgment and more like revelation, not only for them, but for everyone listening. When she addressed Principal Rivera, her tone changed again, gentle, almost maternal. "You saw what happened that day," she said. "You knew it wasn't right, but you looked away." Rivera lowered her head. "I was scared, Your Honor. I didn't want to lose my job. And now?" Alana asked quietly. "Now I wish I'd lost it," Rivera whispered, "because I lost something greater instead, my courage." That confession brought tears to Alana's eyes. "We all lose courage sometimes," she said softly. "The test isn't whether we fall, it's whether we learn to stand again." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted. It was no longer a courtroom, it was a mirror. Everyone there saw their reflection, their prejudice, their fear, their complicity, and for the first time, they couldn't look away. When the rulings were read, no one cheered, no one clapped. The moment was too sacred for celebration. Sergeant Doyle was formally demoted and placed under internal review. Officer Mason resigned voluntarily, a decision that came with tears, but also with relief. And in one of the most powerful moments of her career, Judge Pierce recommended that both men participate in a community-led program, one where they'd listen to the stories of those who had been wronged by people in uniform. "Understanding," she said, "isn't born in policy, it's born in proximity." Her final words of the hearing were simple, yet unforgettable. "You once thought I was just another woman in a parking lot, but I am every woman who's ever been stopped for looking like she doesn't belong. I am every mother who's had to teach her son how to survive a misunderstanding, and I am every person who believes that justice, true justice, is not a privilege, but a promise." Reporters didn't even move at first. The sound of her gavel striking the bench was the only thing that broke the spell. Outside, the crowd erupted. But Alana didn't smile. She walked past the cameras, past the reporters, shouting questions, and into the open air. The sky was bright, blindingly bright, as if the world itself was trying to cleanse the darkness of the past few weeks. Officer Mason caught up to her near the courthouse steps. "Judge Pierce," he said quietly, "I want to do better. I want to learn." She turned to him. "Then start by listening," she said. "Really listening." He nodded. "Would you mentor me?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I will if you're willing to unlearn before you learn." He extended his hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she took it, a simple gesture, but one that carried more weight than any verdict could. A few steps away, Sergeant Doyle stood alone, watching. He didn't approach, he didn't speak. He simply stood there, the noise of the crowd fading around him, until at last he whispered something only he could hear. "Justice isn't revenge, justice is balance." Weeks later, Principal Rivera returned to the same school parking lot. She hosted a small assembly this time, without fear. She invited Alana to speak to the students about courage, compassion, and consequence. When Alana arrived, the children clapped, and Rivera stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I stayed silent when I should have spoken," she said to the students. "Don't ever do that, not for your job, not for your comfort, not for anything." Alana smiled gently. "Redemption doesn't erase mistakes," she said. "It transforms them." And for the first time since that painful day, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Her story had become more than a viral scandal. It had become a mirror, a movement, a message. Across the nation, conversations shifted. Departments revised their procedures. Schools began workshops on bias and justice. And everywhere she went, people whispered the same thing. She didn't shout, she stood. Months later, when Alana gave her first national interview, she was asked one final question. "Judge Pierce, do you believe America can change?" She paused, smiled, and said, "Change doesn't begin in laws, it begins in hearts." The moment one person chooses understanding over pride, that's where justice begins. And maybe that was the truest lesson of all. So I'll ask you this: if you were standing in her place, facing the same people who humiliated you, would you have forgiven them, or would you have wanted them to feel what you felt? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't leave without subscribing, because the next one, the one I'll share soon, will remind you that even in the darkest systems, light can still rise from the quietest soul. The seasons had changed. The humid Florida air that once carried the echoes of sirens now smelled faintly of rain and redemption. The schoolyard was quieter these days, softer somehow, as if the world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Months had passed since that day, but the memory still hung in the air, invisible yet undeniable. And on this morning, Judge Alana Pierce found herself driving down the same familiar road toward the same school where everything her humiliation, her awakening, and her silent triumph had begun. But this time, the weight in her chest wasn't pain, it was peace. The gates of the school came into view, gleaming under the soft morning sun. Parents stood chatting near their cars, their voices hushed when they saw her. Some smiled awkwardly. Some whispered her name as if it carried sacred weight. And yet, Alana didn't quicken her pace or avert her gaze. She walked tall, her head high, her son Abby's small hand in hers. The world no longer looked at her the same way. But she had learned that was never the point. "Mom," Abby said, his voice filled with innocent pride, "everyone knows who you are now." Alana looked down at him, her heart swelling with a tenderness only a mother could know. She smiled softly and said, "Then maybe, son, they'll start seeing who we all really are." Those words lingered in the air, not just for her child, but for every parent, every teacher, every officer standing nearby. It was a statement that carried centuries of unspoken hope. "See us for who we are, not who you assume us to be." At the school entrance stood Officer Mason. No longer in uniform, he wore a simple blue shirt with a community center badge pinned to his chest. His hair was shorter now, his expression gentler, a man reshaped not by punishment but by purpose. When he saw her, he didn't hesitate. He opened the door with a quiet smile and said, "Good morning, Judge Pierce." She paused for a moment, studying his face. The last time they stood in that same space, fear and guilt had shadowed his eyes. Today, there was humility and something far greater growth. "Good morning, Mason," she replied, her tone warm, forgiving. "How's the program going?" He smiled shyly. "We just finished our 10th workshop. We had kids from 3 schools come in last week. We talked about bias, fairness, and listening before reacting. It's changing people, ma'am." Alana nodded slowly. "Good. Change doesn't need to be loud to be real." He looked down for a moment, voice breaking slightly. "You were right. Silence can teach. It taught me." There was a pause. The kind that heals. Then, for the first time since everything happened, she extended her hand not as a judge, not as a symbol, but as a person. He took it. In that handshake lived 1,000 unspoken truths: repentance, respect, renewal. As she walked her son through the hallways, Alana noticed how different the energy felt. Teachers greeted her warmly, children smiled, even parents who once averted their eyes now stepped forward to say hello. But she didn't need validation. Her peace came from something far deeper, knowing that dignity, when chosen over rage, can reshape entire communities. That day, as she stood by the classroom door and watched Abby join his friends, she realized how full the circle had become. The same place that had tried to strip her of her humanity now stood as proof of her strength. The humiliation that was meant to silence her had instead become a sermon that spoke across cities and screens, in whispers and conversations, in classrooms and courtrooms. Alana's arrest had been an incident, but her response, her grace, had become a movement. When she walked back to her car, the morning air felt lighter. Reporters no longer waited at the gate. Protest signs had faded, but something more lasting remained: change. Across Florida, and then across the nation, communities began to act. What started as outrage evolved into dialogue. What began as division gave birth to reform. The first ripple came from Mason's new program, the Listening Initiative. It paired law enforcement officers with local youth for monthly workshops on empathy and accountability. Within months, it expanded beyond the city. Police departments from Georgia, Alabama, and even California requested the curriculum. Then came the Pierce Foundation for Justice and Grace, founded by community leaders who wanted to honor her message. It provided legal aid for marginalized families and training for officers who wished to rebuild trust. And yet, Alana never stood in front of cameras to take credit. Her reward wasn't fame. It was the quiet knowledge that every story like hers that ended in peace instead of vengeance was a victory for humanity. Late one afternoon, she visited her father's grave, the man whose wrongful arrest had planted the seed of her purpose decades earlier. The wind rustled through the trees as she knelt down, placing a small white lily on the stone. "Daddy," she whispered, "I kept my promise. I changed something, not everything, but something." The breeze carried her words away, as if the earth itself nodded in approval. In the distance, children's laughter echoed from a nearby park, the same park where the community now gathered each weekend for Unity Days. Events started in her honor. Every Saturday, families of all backgrounds came together to talk, to share, to listen. Officers without badges joined kids in games, teachers shared food, neighbors learned names they once avoided. And on a wooden sign by the entrance to that park were words carved by a local artist. Respect should never depend on appearance. Those 7 words became the anthem of the movement, printed on shirts, painted on murals, shared in classrooms. But for Alana, they were simply truth, an old truth the world had forgotten, now spoken anew. Months later, Alana was invited to speak at a national justice conference in Washington, D.C. Her face appeared on screens across the country once more, not as a victim, but as a voice. Standing before a crowd of leaders, lawmakers, and everyday citizens, she began her speech with quiet conviction. "This story was never about one woman in handcuffs," she said. "It was about what those handcuffs represented, how quickly perception can blind justice, and how easily power can forget humility. But it was also about something more powerful, how grace can restore what pride destroys." Her words hung in the air, rich and steady. "I learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet choice to hold your head high when the world tries to bow it for you. And justice, real justice, doesn't need anger to speak, it needs courage to listen." Applause rippled through the crowd, not thunderous, but heartfelt, the kind of applause that comes from people who have been changed, not just entertained. Afterward, journalists would write that she didn't just address a nation, she reminded it what humanity sounded like. But Alana didn't think of herself as extraordinary. She thought of herself as a mother, a judge, a daughter, a woman who had chosen dignity when the world demanded outrage. That evening, as she sat alone in her study, the glow of a desk lamp casting soft light across her papers, she opened an envelope. It was from Officer Mason. Inside was a letter, handwritten, earnest, imperfect. It read, "Dear Judge Pierce, I've started teaching at-risk teens about empathy and bias. I tell them your story, not the viral version, but the real one, the one about forgiveness, the one about power in silence. Thank you for not giving up on me when I deserved it least. You once said justice was balance. I finally understand what you meant. With respect, Mason." Alana smiled, folded the letter carefully, and placed it in her journal. It was a simple thing. But to her, it was proof change was possible, one conscience at a time. Weeks turned into months, and her life moved forward not as a symbol, but as a steady flame guiding others through darkness. She still faced criticism. Some said she was too soft. Others said she should have fought harder. But she knew the truth: grace isn't weakness, it's strength under control. And every time she saw her son laugh freely, without fear, she knew she had chosen right. One Sunday morning, as she and Abby walked into church, a stranger approached her, an elderly woman with trembling hands. "Judge Pierce," she said softly, "I lost faith in this country years ago. But when I saw you stand there, silent and strong, I remembered what hope looks like. Thank you." Alana touched her hand gently. "Hope doesn't fade," she said. "It just needs someone to hold it up again." That woman's tears fell silently, and in them, Alana saw the reflection of 1,000 others who had finally been seen. By now, her story was taught in law schools, discussed in police academies, and analyzed in leadership seminars. But beyond all that, it lived in hearts, in mothers, sons, and strangers who finally dared to believe that integrity could still win in the end. Because what Alana Pierce proved wasn't just that justice could prevail, she proved that humanity could heal. And as the camera fades in our minds, picture this: her son running ahead to class, laughter echoing. Alana standing still for a moment, watching the sunlight bounce off the school windows, the same glass that once reflected blue and red lights, now glimmering gold. A gentle smile curves her lips. The world had changed not entirely, not perfectly, but enough to matter. This, she whispers to herself, is what victory feels like. Her story ends not with applause, but with peace. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are the quiet ones, the kind that live on not in headlines, but in hearts. And as her voice lingers in the distance, let me leave you with this. This story wasn't about one arrest. It wasn't even about one woman. It was about all of us, about how easy it is to judge, and how hard it is to see, about how quickly perception can blind justice, and how grace, simple, unshakable grace, can restore it. So, before you go, I want to ask you something. If you had been in her place, humiliated, handcuffed, silenced, would you have chosen her path of restraint? Would you have stayed silent, like Judge Pierce, or spoken out in anger? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know. And if this story moved you even a little, if it stirred something deep within you, share it. Because someone you know needs to hear it today. And make sure you subscribe, not just for stories like this, but for reminders of what we're still capable of when we lead with courage, compassion, and dignity. Because in the end, dignity is the loudest form of power. And silence, when chosen with purpose, can echo louder than any shout ever could.